The Hall of 1,000 Stars floated above the planet like a silent crown, shining in the dark space. Inside it, the rulers of many alien worlds stood in perfect lines, their robes glowing with soft light, their eyes watching everything. Tonight was not just a ceremony. It was a warning to the galaxy. Humans were rising again, and the High Empire did not trust them. Princess Illyra stood beside her father on the crystal platform. She looked calm, distant, and royal. Her silver skin shimmered under the floating lights, and her long white hair moved gently in the artificial breeze. No one could see the storm inside her heart. She had been raised to believe one rule above all others: humans are forbidden. The Emperor lifted his staff, and the hall became silent. "Tonight we renew the ancient laws," he said, his deep voice echoing across the chamber. "No royal blood shall ever bond with a human." The words felt heavy in the air. Many leaders nodded in agreement. Some even smiled. To them, humans were reckless, emotional, and dangerous. Then the great doors opened. A single human walked inside. Whispers spread across the hall like cold wind. Some alien guards tightened their weapons. Others stared in open dislike. Humans were rarely invited into royal space, and never during sacred ceremonies. The human's name was Kale. He wore a simple, dark uniform, not decorated like the alien leaders around him. He had no glowing armor, no advanced crown, no sign of fear. He walked forward with steady steps, his back straight, his eyes calm. Princess Illyra felt her breath pause. She had seen humans before in recordings, in battle reports, in political meetings, but seeing one here, standing alone among the most powerful beings in the galaxy, felt different. Kale did not bow deeply like others. He lowered his head slightly, but he did not kneel. A quiet tension filled the hall. The Emperor studied him carefully. "You stand before the High Empire," he said. "Speak your purpose." Kale's voice was firm but respectful. "I come as a representative of Earth. We seek peace, not conflict." Some leaders laughed softly. Peace from humans sounded like a joke to them. But Kale did not react. He did not defend himself with anger. He did not show weakness either. He simply stood there, steady as stone. Princess Illyra looked at him. For 1 second, their eyes met. Time slowed. She saw something she did not expect. Not aggression, not fear, not arrogance. She saw courage, quiet courage, the kind that does not need to shout. Her heart beat faster. She quickly looked away, but it was too late. Something had already changed inside her. "Humans are forbidden," she whispered in her mind. The law was clear. Royal blood must remain pure. History had shown the cost of mixing with humans. Centuries ago, a bond between a human commander and an alien princess had started a war that burned half the galaxy. That story was taught to every royal child. Yet her heart betrayed her. "Humans are forbidden, yet my heart chose you." The thought slipped through her like a dangerous secret. Kale continued speaking about trade routes, about cooperation, about shared defense against unknown threats in deep space. His words were simple, clear, and honest. He did not beg. He did not threaten. He offered partnership. Many leaders looked bored. Some looked angry. But the princess listened. She noticed how he chose his words carefully, how he respected their culture without lowering his own people. The Emperor's eyes slowly moved toward his daughter. He had ruled for centuries. He could read expressions like open books. He noticed the way her fingers tightened slightly around her royal staff, the way her breathing changed when a human spoke. A small shadow crossed his face. When Kale finished, silence returned. The Emperor finally spoke. "The Empire will consider your proposal." His tone was neutral, unreadable. Guards stepped forward to escort Kale away. As he turned to leave, he glanced once more toward the platform. Again, their eyes met. This time, she did not look away quickly. It lasted only a moment, but it felt like a promise neither of them understood yet. When the doors closed behind him, the whispers grew louder. Some leaders demanded stricter control over humans. Others warned that Earth was growing stronger each year. Princess Illyra stood still, pretending nothing had changed. Inside her mind, everything had changed. Far beyond the palace, stars burned in silence. unaware that a single look had just begun something that could shake empires. And high above the galaxy, destiny shifted quietly, because sometimes wars do not begin with weapons. Sometimes they begin with a forbidden look. If you enjoy powerful HFY sci-fi stories like this, gently consider subscribing to the channel so you do not miss what happens next. The human who stood inside the High Empire's palace was not supposed to exist. At least, that was what many alien records claimed. According to their archives, humans were unstable, divided, easy to break under pressure, a species that would destroy itself before it ever became a true galactic power. Yet Kale had walked alone into the heart of the most powerful empire in the known universe, and he had not shaken once. Long before he stood under crystal lights in silent judgment, Kale had survived something no ordinary human should have survived. 5 years earlier, a remote human colony on the edge of map space had gone dark. No signals, no warnings, only silence. When Earth Command finally reached the system, they found ruins floating in orbit. The attack was precise, clean, and merciless. It was not pirates. It was not random violence. It was a hunting party from a rival alien faction that believed humanity should be erased before it grew stronger. Kale had been there. He was not the highest-ranking officer. He was not the strongest soldier. He was simply the one who refused to die quietly. When the colony shields failed and chaos spread through the streets, most believed it was over. But Kale gathered the survivors, civilians and soldiers alike, and led them through maintenance tunnels beneath the city. For 3 days they hid, moving in darkness while alien drones searched above. For 3 nights, he returned alone to the surface to steal supplies, risking death each time. When the alien hunters finally located the underground shelters, Kale did not surrender. He activated an unfinished mining reactor and turned it into a weapon. The explosion destroyed half the colony, but it also destroyed the hunting fleet in orbit. The few survivors were rescued weeks later, and Kale was found unconscious in the wreckage, burned, injured, but alive. Many humans called him a hero. Many aliens called him proof that humans were dangerous, because no other species would destroy its own city just to deny victory to the enemy. That story traveled through secret channels across the galaxy. The High Empire studied it carefully. They labeled Kale as highly resilient and strategically unpredictable. In simple terms, he was the kind of human they feared most: calm, intelligent, and willing to sacrifice everything if pushed too far. Now, that same man had walked into their palace offering peace. Princess Elira had read the reports. She had seen the images of the ruined colony, the blackened skies, the silent bodies. She expected to see anger in him, hatred perhaps, but when she saw him in person, she saw something else: control. Later that evening, in a private chamber lined with glowing data crystals, the Emperor met with his advisors. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of ancient machines. "This human is not ordinary," one advisor said, his voice thin and sharp. "He should not exist. Humans are chaotic, but this one is focused. That makes him more dangerous." The Emperor listened without emotion. "Or more useful," he replied calmly. Outside the chamber, hidden behind a thin energy screen, Princess Elira stood still, listening. She knew she should not be there. Royals were not meant to spy on council meetings, but something about Kale pulled her toward answers. "He destroyed his own colony to win," another advisor said. "If he can sacrifice his own people, imagine what he would do to ours." Elira felt anger rise in her chest. They spoke as if they understood him, as if a single report could define a soul. They did not see the weight in his eyes, the quiet pain he carried without complaint. When the meeting ended, the Emperor walked alone through the corridor, and he sensed her presence before she stepped forward. "You are curious about the human," he said without looking at her. "I am curious about truth," she answered carefully. The Emperor finally faced her. His ancient eyes searched her expression. "Truth is simple. Humans grow stronger each year. If guided, they could become allies. If ignored, they could become rivals. If threatened, they become something far worse." "And what is that?" she asked softly. "Survivors," he replied. Meanwhile, Kale was not resting comfortably as a guest. He was placed in a guarded diplomatic suite. watched by silent drones that floated near the ceiling. The Empire did not trust easily. Even in peace talks, security was absolute. Kale stood by the transparent wall, looking at the endless stars outside. He knew he was being monitored. He knew every movement was recorded. But he did not act nervous. He simply thought about Earth, about the fragile hope resting on his shoulders. He had not come here only for politics. He had come because intelligence reports suggested something larger was moving in deep space, a threat that did not belong to humans or the Empire, something ancient, something patient. If humanity and the Empire remained divided, neither would survive what was coming. But convincing a galaxy built on fear would not be easy. As he turned away from the stars, one of the drones flickered strangely for a moment. Just a small glitch, almost invisible. Kale noticed it. His instincts sharpened instantly. Someone else was watching. Not the Empire. Someone hidden within it. Far across the palace, Princess Alira stood alone in her chamber, replaying the memory of his steady voice. She placed her hand gently over her chest, trying to calm the strange warmth growing there. "Humans are forbidden," she whispered again. But now the words felt weaker, because deep in the shadows of the Empire, forces were already moving, and the human who should not exist was becoming the center of a storm no one yet understood. The palace of the High Empire was built with beauty and control and perfect balance. Every corridor shimmered with living crystal. Every wall listened. Every shadow belonged to someone. Secrets rarely survived inside such a place. And yet that night, a secret began to breathe. Princess Alira stood alone in her private chamber, staring at the soft glow of the city below. The floating capital stretched endlessly into the sky, ships moving like silent fish through oceans of stars. She should have been resting, preparing for the next council session, preparing to forget the human diplomat who had disturbed her calm world. But instead, she was making a decision that could destroy everything she had ever known. On her desk rested a small communication shard, unauthorized, unregistered, invisible to the palace network. She had taken it from an old research archive years ago, never expecting to use it for something so dangerous. Her fingers hovered above it for several seconds. Her training told her to stop. Her heart told her to continue. Across the palace, Kale stood in his guarded suite, pretending to read diplomatic reports. The drones above him hummed softly, but he had already mapped their movement patterns. Every 13 seconds, there was a blind spot of less than half a second, too small for most species to notice, long enough for a human who had survived war. A faint signal vibrated against his wrist device, encrypted and simple. 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses. Not official, not imperial, intentional. Kale did not react outwardly. He continued walking slowly toward the far wall, stretching as if tired. As the drone turned slightly, he shifted into the blind spot and activated his hidden receiver. A single line appeared. Biogarden Sector 7, midnight. No signature, no explanation. But he knew. Midnight inside the Empire meant the artificial lights would dim slightly to simulate planetary rotation cycles. Security would remain high, but patterns would soften. It was the only time something like this could even be attempted. He deleted the message instantly. His pulse remained steady, but his mind was sharp. This could be a trap, a test, or something far more dangerous. Meanwhile, Princess Alira moved through a concealed passage built centuries ago for royal emergencies. The walls were darker here, older, untouched by modern upgrades. She wore a simple cloak that hid her glowing markings. If anyone saw her like this, questions would spread quickly. The biogarden was one of the most beautiful places in the palace, a living ecosystem under a transparent dome. Alien trees rising toward artificial stars, soft blue rivers flowing through glowing plants. It was meant to represent harmony between species, a symbol of unity the Empire rarely practiced. She arrived first, standing beneath a tall silver tree whose leaves hummed quietly in the night air. Her breathing was calm on the outside, but inside she felt like she was standing on the edge of space without a shield. Minutes passed. Then she heard footsteps. Not rushed, not heavy. Confident. Kale stepped into the garden light, his eyes immediately scanning the area. measuring exits, shadows, distances. Only after confirming they were alone did he look directly at her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not empty, it was charged. "You should not be here," she said first, her voice soft but controlled. "Neither should you," he replied gently. A small tension broke between them, almost like the beginning of trust. "You risk much by meeting me," Kale continued. "If this is a test, I prefer honesty." "It is not a test," she said quickly, then lowered her tone. "It is a question." He waited. "Why did you really come here?" she asked, her eyes search his face not as a princess, but as someone seeking truth. Kale did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to the glowing river, watching the light reflect across the water. "Because something is coming," he said finally. Her expression changed slightly. "You speak of rumors." "I speak of patterns," he corrected calmly. "Entire trade routes disappearing beyond mapped space. Probes failing without damage. Colonies reporting shadows that do not match known species." The air seemed colder suddenly. "The Empire knows this," she said quietly. "Does it?" Kale asked, turning toward her. "Or does it ignore it because it prefers control over uncertainty?" For the first time, she saw frustration beneath his calm surface. Not anger toward her, but toward a galaxy too proud to prepare together. "You destroyed your own colony," she said carefully. "Many here believe that makes you dangerous." Kale's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "I destroyed empty buildings to save lives. I chose survival over pride." She stepped closer now, close enough to see the faint scar along his temple, a reminder of fire and loss. "You are not what our records describe," she admitted softly. "And you are not what your laws demand," he answered without hesitation. Her breath caught. At that exact moment, a faint clicking sound echoed from the edge of the garden. Both of them reacted instantly. Kale shifted slightly in front of her without thinking, his posture protective, ready. From the shadows above, a small surveillance drone descended slowly, its lens glowing red. They had not been alone. Princess Elira felt cold realization spread through her. The drone did not belong to the palace security grid. Its design was older, modified, hidden. Someone inside the Empire was watching them without permission. The drone recorded silently for 2 seconds too long. Then it vanished upward into the darkness. Kale looked at her, his voice low. This was never just about forbidden feelings, was it? She shook her head slowly, fear and understanding mixing in her eyes. "No," she whispered. "This is about something much bigger." Far above them, in a hidden observation chamber, an unknown figure watched the recording playback. The image of the alien princess standing close to the human diplomat glowing in the dark. And a quiet voice said, "Let them continue. The storm will be more useful if it grows naturally." The law of blood and fire was older than the palace itself, older than the floating capital, older even than the current emperor's reign. It was carved into the first stone of the empire after a war that nearly erased entire star systems. Every royal child learned it before they learned diplomacy, before they learned strategy, before they learned mercy. The law was simple and absolute. No royal blood shall ever bond with a human. By morning, the palace no longer felt beautiful. It felt heavy, watched, tense. Word had not spread publicly, but inside the highest levels of power, whispers moved faster than light. The unauthorized drone recording had already reached the emperor's private chamber. Princess Elira was summoned before sunrise. She walked through the grand corridor alone, her steps calm even though her thoughts were not. Guards lined the walls, avoiding her eyes. The air felt colder than usual. The throne chamber doors opened slowly, revealing her father standing before the massive star map projection. His back was straight, his hands resting behind him. The glowing image of the galaxy rotated silently above. "You met him," the emperor said without turning around. It was not a question. Elira did not lie. "Yes," she answered clearly. The silence that followed felt longer than it was. Finally, he turned to face her. His ancient eyes held no visible anger, only something more dangerous, disappointment mixed with calculation. "Do you understand what you have done?" he asked calmly. "I spoke with a diplomat," she replied. "Nothing more." The Emperor activated the recording. The image of the biogarden appeared between them, showing her standing close to Kale, showing his protective movement when the drone appeared. The proof did not scream rebellion, but it whispered it. "The law of blood and fire exists for a reason," the Emperor said, his voice steady but firm. "Centuries ago, a royal princess chose a human commander over her own people. She believed love could unite two species. Instead, it divided them." The star map shifted, showing historical footage. Entire fleets burning, planets scarred, cities collapsing under orbital fire. The human commander was not evil, the Emperor continued. But other alien leaders saw the Union as betrayal. They feared human influence inside the royal bloodline. Fear turned into aggression. Aggression turned into war. Alira watched the destruction silently. Billions died, the Emperor said, not because of hatred, but because of fear. She finally met his eyes. Then the problem was fear, not love. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his face. "You speak as if history is simple," he replied. "It is not. The Empire survived because we drew a line in fire. We declared that such bonds would never happen again." "And if the line is wrong?" she asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Before he could answer, the chamber doors opened abruptly. The royal security commander entered, kneeling briefly. "Your Majesty, the human diplomat has been detained." Alira's heart dropped, but her expression remained controlled. "On what charge?" she demanded. "Suspicion of manipulating royal authority," the commander replied, "and possible espionage." "That is false," she said immediately. "Perhaps," the Emperor said calmly, "but perception shapes stability." Meanwhile, Kale was escorted through a lower corridor beneath the palace. His hands were restrained by energy cuffs. Not because he resisted, but because protocol demanded control. His face showed no panic, only thought. He had expected consequences, just not this quickly. Inside a holding chamber surrounded by force fields, he stood alone. The walls hummed softly, blocking all communication signals. Moments later, a projection of the Emperor appeared before him. "You have caused disruption within my house," the Emperor said. "I came for alliance," Kale answered steadily. "If speaking truth causes disruption, then perhaps your house stands on fragile ground." The Emperor studied him carefully, searching for arrogance, for deception, but he found neither. "You are aware of the ancient law," the Emperor said. "I am aware of fear," Kale replied. The Emperor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Be careful, human." "I'm always careful," Kale answered calmly. Back in her chamber, Alira felt the weight of helplessness press against her chest. She had grown up powerful, respected, untouchable, yet in this moment, she could do nothing without risking civil fracture. The council convened quickly that afternoon. The recording was presented as evidence of inappropriate royal conduct, though it showed nothing openly treasonous. It showed proximity, tension, connection, and in politics, connection could be more dangerous than weapons. After hours of debate, the decision was announced privately. The human diplomat would face public trial, and if found guilty of influencing royal authority, he would face execution under the law of blood and fire. The news reached Alira in silence, delivered by a trusted attendant who avoided her gaze. Execution. The word echoed in her mind, heavy and final. Far below the palace, Kale sat alone in the containment chamber. Watching the faint reflection of his own face in the force field, he thought of Earth, of the colony he lost, of the future he had hoped to protect. If his death preserved peace, perhaps it was acceptable. But something inside him whispered that this was not simply punishment. It was movement, a setup, because the drone that recorded them had not belonged to official security. Someone had wanted this outcome. And high above, in a hidden chamber beyond the Emperor's knowledge, the unknown observer watched the council's decision with quiet satisfaction. The line of fire has been crossed, The voice murmured softly, "Now let us see how brightly the galaxy burns." The day of execution arrived without ceremony. The sky above the floating capital was darkened intentionally. As if even the artificial stars refused to shine, public announcements declared that the human diplomat had violated sacred boundaries, that the law of blood and fire would be upheld without hesitation. Stability required sacrifice, and sacrifice would be made. Princess Illyra stood in her chamber, dressed not in royal silver, but in deep crimson, the color of ancient judgment. Her reflection in the mirror looked strong, controlled, unshaken, but her hands trembled slightly when no one could see. This was the moment history would remember, either as loyalty to the empire or betrayal of it. Below the palace, the execution platform extended outward into open space, protected by layered shields, visible to the council, visible to the people through live projection. A reminder that laws were real and consequences were final. Kale was escorted onto the platform in silence. His restraints were removed, not as mercy, but as confidence. The Empire did not believe he could escape. He stood at the center of the circular platform, wind from the atmospheric stabilizers moving his dark uniform slightly. His eyes lifted once toward the towering palace above, searching. High above, Illyra stepped onto the royal balcony beside her father. The council members surrounded them in glowing robes, their faces unreadable, waiting. The Emperor's voice echoed across the capital. The law of blood and fire was created to protect this empire from division and ruin. Today, it stands firm once again. Kale did not bow his head. He did not shout. He did not beg. Inside, his thoughts were calm. If his death strengthened peace between Earth and the Empire, perhaps it was a price worth paying. But something felt wrong. The drone from the garden, the speed of the trial, the pressure from certain council members. It had moved too perfectly. On the balcony, Illyra's heart pounded louder than the crowd's distant murmurs. She could still step back, still allow the law to complete its course, still remain the obedient daughter and future empress. Or she could choose differently. The execution device activated, a column of focused energy forming slowly above the platform. Humming with quiet power, one command would end everything. "Do it," one council elder whispered sharply. The Emperor hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Then the sky changed. A violent shockwave tore through the upper atmosphere. The palace shields flared bright blue as something massive struck from above. The artificial stars flickered, alarms screaming across every system. Warships, unknown signatures dropping out of hyperspace directly above the capital. Their hulls dark, their designs unfamiliar, older than current Imperial fleets, yet far more advanced. Panic spread instantly. The execution beam destabilized and shut down as defense grids redirected power to shields. The council chamber erupted into confusion, officers shouting reports of multiple impact points across the city. On the platform, Kale reacted without hesitation. He sprinted toward a fallen guard, grabbing the weapon before security drones recalibrated. His movements were precise, controlled, not chaotic, not reckless. Above, Illyra stared at the incoming fleet projections, recognition dawning slowly. These were not random attackers. These ships matched fragmented reports from deep space disappearances, the same shadow threat Kale had warned about. "They are targeting power cores," a commander shouted. "They know our layout," which meant someone had given them access. A second shockwave hit, collapsing part of the lower shield grid. Explosions rippled through distant towers. On the execution platform, a strike tore through the outer rim, throwing debris into space. Kale grabbed a wounded guard and pulled him toward a stabilizer barrier, shielding him from vacuum exposure. Inside the palace, emergency lights turned crimson. The Emperor watched the chaos unfold, understanding spreading across his ancient mind. The trial, the pressure, the sudden attack. This was no coincidence. "They waited for instability," he murmured. "They created it," Illyra answered quietly. Another explosion rocked the balcony, forcing council members to retreat. A massive breach warning flashed across the central display. One of the primary shield generators had fallen. "Your Majesty, we must evacuate," security officers urged. The Emperor refused, standing firm. "I will not abandon my people." At that exact moment, a strike pierced the balcony's outer barrier. The blast waved through several guards aside. A fragment of burning metal hurtled directly toward the Emperor. Time slowed. Before anyone else could react, a figure leaped forward from the chaos below. Kale! He had reached a transport lift and forced manual override during the confusion, racing upward through collapsing corridors, ignoring injury and fire, following instinct. He tackled the Emperor out of the fragment's path, the metal crashing against the floor behind them, sparks flying. For a second, everything went silent. The human who had been seconds away from execution now knelt beside the ruler who had condemned him, shielding him with his own body. Guards raised weapons, confused, unsure whether to fire. Kale slowly stood, hands open, breathing heavy but steady. "This is the threat I warned you about," he said firmly. "They are not here for politics. They are here for extinction." The Emperor looked at him, not as a criminal, not as a diplomat, but as a warrior who had chosen to protect rather than escape. Outside, the unknown fleet began deploying smaller assault crafts, targeting civilian sectors. The capital was burning. The law of blood and fire suddenly felt small compared to what was unfolding. High above the battlefield, within the command ship of the invading force, the hidden observer watched with narrowed eyes. "The human survives," a subordinate reported. "Yes," the voice answered calmly. "And now the Empire will see what he truly is." Back on the shattered balcony, alarms howling, smoke rising into artificial skies. Princess Illyra stepped beside Kale openly, no longer hiding distance between them. This was no longer about forbidden feelings. This was about survival. And the choice she made in the next moments would not just break tradition. It would break empires. The capital burned for 3 hours before the Empire regained partial control of its skies. Defense fleets launched from hidden docks beneath the floating city, engaging the dark invading ships in violent silence. Explosions flashed like artificial suns against the void, debris falling like metal rain. Inside the palace, emergency systems sealed damaged sectors while medical teams rushed through corridors thick with smoke. Kale did not retreat. When ordered, he moved with trained precision beside Imperial soldiers, adapting instantly to alien weapon systems. Reading battlefield data faster than most commanders expected, he did not fight like someone seeking revenge. He fought like someone protecting a future. Princess Illyra watched him through live tactical feeds as he coordinated a counterstrike that saved an entire civilian district from orbital bombardment. His voice over the shared channel was steady, calm, never panicked, even as buildings collapsed around him. "He predicts their movement patterns," one Imperial strategist whispered in disbelief. "He understands them." "No," Illyra answered quietly. "He understands war." In the central command chamber, the Emperor studied incoming intelligence. Something about the invading fleet disturbed him beyond its firepower. Their knowledge of shield weaknesses, their timing during the execution, their immediate strike on civilian infrastructure rather than military hubs. This was not conquest. This was punishment. "Trace the signal origin," he ordered sharply. Moments later, the answer arrived, and silence fell across the chamber. The command codes used to breach outer defenses were Imperial, not stolen, not hacked, authorized. Betrayal did not come from outside. It came from within. A secret transmission was intercepted shortly after, broadcast from a hidden chamber deep beneath the palace. The voice was distorted but clear in intent. "The Empire grows soft," it said. "It hesitates, it questions its own laws. Humans are infection, and fear is the cure." The Emperor recognized the frequency signature. It belonged to one of the oldest council elders, a leader who had publicly demanded Kale's execution with unusual urgency. The realization hit like cold gravity. The ancient war blamed on a human royal bond had never been fully honest history. Records have been edited, simplified, rewritten to protect stability. In truth, That war had been fueled by extremist alien factions terrified of sharing power with a rapidly evolving species. Humans had not ignited the flames. They had simply been convenient fuel. As the Emperor processed this, Kale entered the command chamber, escorted by 2 guards who now treated him less like a prisoner and more like an ally. His uniform was torn, a faint line of blood marking his brow. But his eyes remained clear. "You knew," the Emperor said quietly. "I suspected," Kale answered. "Our long-range probes picked up similar patterns before colonies vanished. The attackers use fear to divide first, then strike when trust collapses." A projection lit up the chamber, showing data recovered from destroyed enemy vessels, genetic scans, structural codes, political insignias long thought extinct. "They are remnants of the Purity Dominion," Alira whispered, recalling forbidden archives, the same faction that opposed interspecies alliances centuries ago. "They never disappeared," Kale said calmly. "They adapted." The room felt smaller suddenly, the truth larger than tradition. "You allowed my execution to weaken the Empire," the Emperor said, his voice heavy with realization. "They needed instability inside before attacking outside." Kale did not respond with accusation, only quiet confirmation. Outside, the final invading cruiser detonated under concentrated Imperial fire, its explosion casting long shadows across the capital. The immediate threat was over, but the damage remained, both physical and political. In the council chamber, surviving elders gathered, their expressions shaken. The evidence of internal betrayal was undeniable. The Purity Dominion's influence had infiltrated high ranks, manipulating ancient fear to maintain control. Princess Alira stepped forward before the assembly, no longer uncertain, no longer divided. "You taught me that the law of blood and fire protected us from destruction," she said clearly. "But today we were nearly destroyed because we followed fear without question." Murmurs spread across the chamber. "Humans did not cause the ancient war," she continued. "Fear did, and fear still hides among us." The Emperor stood slowly beside her, his authority no longer rooted only in tradition, but in truth. "The law will be reviewed," he declared, his voice echoing through the hall. "Effective immediately, the human diplomat Kale is cleared of all charges." Shock rippled outward. Kale remained still, understanding that this was not victory, but transition. The Emperor turned toward him fully. "You saved my life, you defended my people, you warned us of threat we refused to see." He paused, centuries of pride shifting within him. "Perhaps the truth about humans is not that they are dangerous," he said slowly, "but that they endure." Kale met his gaze evenly. "We endure because we have to," he answered, "not because we want to rule." Silence followed, heavy but no longer hostile. In distant systems, news of the attack and the humans' actions began to spread. Younger alien leaders watched the reports carefully, seeing not a monster, but a protector. The truth about humans was changing, not through speeches but through action. Yet deep in the void beyond mapped space, a single remaining Purity Dominion vessel drifted unseen, transmitting data towards something far older than their faction, something that had watched the battle with cold interest. Because while the Empire had uncovered one truth, another, far greater truth was still waiting in the dark. The days after the attack felt unreal. The capital still floated in the sky, but scars marked its shining towers. Burned metal replaced polished crystal in many places, and the people who once trusted ancient laws without question now whispered in uncertain tones. The Purity Dominion had been exposed, several council elders arrested, hidden networks dismantled, yet fear had not disappeared. It had simply changed shape. Across the galaxy, leaders watched carefully. Some praised the Empire for surviving. Others questioned its stability. Rumors spread faster than official statements. The most powerful alien empire had nearly collapsed because of its own division, and at the center of it all stood a human who had been moments from execution. In the Grand Council chamber, representatives from dozens of systems gathered once more, this time not for ceremony, but for decision. The law of blood and fire stood suspended, neither active nor erased, waiting. Princess Illyra stood beside Kale openly now. No distance, no hidden glances. The choice she had once feared was no longer private. It was visible to the entire galaxy. The Emperor rose slowly, his presence still commanding, but no longer unquestioned. "We built our strength on unity," he began, his voice steady. "Yet we allowed fear to define who could stand beside us." A projection activated above the chamber, showing battle footage from the recent attack. Kale coordinating defenses, Imperial ships responding, civilians evacuated in time because of his warning. "This human saved our capital," the Emperor continued. "Not because he sought power, not because he demanded recognition, but because extinction does not discriminate between species." Murmurs spread through the chamber, some supportive, some resistant. One elder from a distant system stepped forward, his voice sharp. "If you remove the law, you risk civil fracture. Ancient alliances were built upon it. Some factions will not accept this change." Kale remained silent. He understood the weight of politics. He understood that love alone would not convince an empire. Illyra stepped forward before hesitation could grow, her voice clear and strong. "The law of blood and fire was created after a war born of fear, not truth," she said. "We nearly lost everything again because we repeated that fear." She turned slightly toward Kale, not as a princess seeking permission, but as a leader making a choice. Humans are not forbidden because they are weak. They are feared because they endure, because they adapt, because they refuse to disappear. The chamber fell into heavy silence. Kale finally spoke, his tone calm but powerful. "If my presence threatens your unity, I will leave. Earth does not seek to divide this empire. We seek survival against what is coming." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But understand this. The enemy beyond your borders does not care about your bloodlines. It does not honor your ancient laws. It only sees targets." The projection shifted, showing deep space anomalies detected beyond mapped regions. Massive energy signatures, moving slowly but deliberately, larger than fleets, older than known civilizations. The Purity Dominion had not been acting alone. They had been preparing the galaxy for something else, something vast and patient. A ripple of unease moved across the council. The Emperor closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with final resolve. "The galaxy stands at a turning point," he declared. "We can cling to laws built on fear, or we can build alliances on truth." He turned toward his daughter. "Princess Illyra, as future Empress, what is your choice?" The chamber seemed to hold its breath. She did not hesitate. "My choice is not rebellion," she said clearly. "It is evolution." She reached for Kale's hand, her fingers closing around his without fear, without apology. Gasps echoed softly, not of outrage, but of realization. In that simple gesture, centuries of division trembled. The Emperor raised his staff slowly, the symbol of ultimate authority glowing brighter than ever before. "The law of blood and fire is hereby dissolved," he announced. "From this day forward, no species shall be forbidden from unity within this empire." The words traveled instantly across communication networks, across star systems, across fleets and colonies. Some factions protested, some threatened separation, but others, especially younger leaders who had witnessed the recent battle, voiced support. They had seen what cooperation could achieve. Far beyond the capital, in distant systems once silent toward humanity, doors began to open cautiously, diplomatic channels activated, messages exchanged. A shift had begun. High above the council chamber, the stars shone once more through the repaired dome, brighter than before. Kale looked at Illyra, no longer needing to hide his emotion. "This will not be easy," he said quietly. "Change never is," she replied softly. In the depths of space, the massive, unknown presence continued its slow approach, unaware or unconcerned with political shifts. But this time, the galaxy would not face it divided. And as fleets began forming joint defense agreements between humans and the Empire for the first time in history, one truth became clear. The galaxy had feared humans for their fire, but in the end, it chose them for their light.